In the dead of night, Moscow's skyline erupted into a theater of war as Ukrainian drone swarms descended upon Russia's heavily fortified capital like digital locusts. The $1.2 billion floating fortress of Russian air defenses crumbled before an unprecedented aerial assault that would reshape modern warfare forever. What transpired in those terrifying hours would expose the vulnerability of the world's most feared military superpower and herald a new era of asymmetric warfare that military strategists are calling the most significant tactical revolution since stealth technology. At precisely 3 a.m. Moscow time, the tranquil darkness shattered as air raid sirens screamed across the sleeping metropolis. Over 12 million residents jolted awake to witness history unfold above their heads. Ukraine had unleashed its most audacious military operation yet, a coordinated drone strike featuring more than 90 unmanned aerial vehicles targeting the very heart of Russian power. The precision timing wasn't coincidental. Ukrainian intelligence had calculated the exact moment when Russian air defense crews would be at their most vulnerable, during the notorious 3 a.m. shift change when alertness levels traditionally plummet. The psychological impact of striking Moscow's sacred airspace cannot be overstated. For decades, the Russian capital had remained untouchable, protected by layer upon layer of the world's most advanced missile defense systems. The S-400 Triumph surface-to-air missile systems, each costing $500 million, formed an impenetrable dome over the city. Pantsir S-1 point defense systems provided close-range protection, while early warning radars stretched hundreds of kilometers beyond the city limits. This wasn't just a military installation. It was a symbol of Russian technological supremacy and territorial integrity, while Kremlin officials desperately claimed their advanced S-400, and Panzer defense systems neutralized most threats. The smoking ruins scattered across 7 central Moscow districts told a dramatically different story. Ukrainian military drones, each costing mere thousands of dollars, systematically overwhelmed billions of dollars worth of Russian air defense technology in what military experts are calling the most cost-effective warfare strategy ever deployed. The mathematics of this engagement are staggering. Ukraine achieved a cost-exchange ratio of approximately $1,000 to 1, meaning every dollar spent on offensive drones forced Russia to expend $1,000 in defensive measures. The tactical brilliance behind this drone warfare revolution lies in Ukraine's innovative swarm attack methodology. Rather than launching a single massive strike, Ukrainian forces deployed multiple waves of autonomous drones from unexpected vectors. Some hugged the terrain like mechanical phantoms, utilizing nap-of-the-earth flight profiles that exploited radar dead zones created by Moscow's urban landscape. Others soared at maximum altitude, appearing as high-value targets to draw defensive fire. The remaining drones occupied middle altitudes, creating a three-dimensional chess game that overwhelmed Russian air defense coordination. Protocol's intelligence sources reveal that Ukraine's drone swarm incorporated artificial intelligence algorithms originally developed for civilian applications. These AI systems enabled real-time tactical decision-making, allowing individual drones to adapt their flight paths based on observed Russian defensive responses. When one drone detected incoming interceptor missiles, it immediately transmitted threat data to the entire swarm, enabling coordinated evasive maneuvers that traditional military doctrine never anticipated. These weren't random kamikaze drones, they were precision-guided weapons executing a masterful deception campaign. Decoy drones deliberately triggered expensive interceptor missiles, depleting Russian ammunition stockpiles while clearing pathways for the primary strike force. Each Ukrainian drone eliminated cost Russia approximately $2 to $3 million in defensive countermeasures, creating an unsustainable economic warfare equation. Military analysts estimate that Russia expended over $200 million in interceptor missiles, radar operation costs, and emergency response resources during the single-night engagement. The decoy strategy revealed Ukraine's sophisticated understanding of Russian air defense psychology. Ukrainian planners knew that Russian operators, trained to prioritize high-value targets, would instinctively engage larger radar signatures first. By deploying corner reflectors and electronic amplifiers on decoy drones, Ukraine created false priority targets that absorbed the initial defensive response while genuine strike packages. Approached from completely different vectors. Moscow's international airports became immediate casualties of this aerial offensive. Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Sheremetyevo airports issued emergency shutdowns, stranding over 130 flights and thousands of passengers. The Russian aviation network, normally processing tens of millions of travelers annually, ground to a complete halt as drone threats made civilian air traffic impossible. Airport authorities faced an unprecedented dilemma. Civilian aircraft radar signatures closely resemble military drones, making it impossible to distinguish between legitimate traffic and potential threats. The aviation industry impact extended far beyond flight cancellations. International airlines immediately reassessed their Moscow routes, with several European carriers suspending service indefinitely. Insurance companies began recalculating risk premiums for Russian airspace operations, adding millions in operational costs. The psychological barrier had been shattered. If Ukrainian drones could penetrate Moscow's airspace, nowhere in Russia could be considered safe from aerial attack. Cargo operations suffered even more severe disruption than passenger services. Moscow serves as a critical logistics hub connecting Europe with Asia, processing billions of dollars in freight annually. The sudden aviation shutdown triggered a supply chain crisis that rippled across international markets. Electronics manufacturers in Asia faced component shortages. European retailers experienced inventory delays, and energy companies struggled with equipment deliveries to Russian facilities. The psychological warfare impact proved even more devastating than physical destruction. For the first time since World War II, ordinary Moscow citizens experienced active combat in their neighborhoods. Residential windows exploded from shock waves, luxury vehicles erupted into fireballs, and entire city blocks plunged into darkness as power infrastructure collapsed under the assault. The sound signatures of incoming drones, a distinctive high-pitched whine that residents described as mechanical wasps, became permanently etched in the collective memory of Moscow's population. Social media platforms exploded with first-hand accounts from terrified residents. Videos captured families huddled in subway stations, children crying as parents struggled to explain why their safe world had suddenly become a war zone. The psychological trauma extended beyond immediate physical danger. Moscow residents now faced the reality that their government's promises of absolute protection were hollow lies. Trust in state institutions, already eroded by economic sanctions and military failures in Ukraine, suffered another devastating blow. Financial markets immediately reflected the chaos as preliminary damage estimates reached $3.2 million in direct costs, not including massive aviation industry losses, supply chain disruptions, and emergency response expenditures. Moscow's reputation as an impregnable fortress evaporated overnight, replaced by the stark reality that Ukrainian drone technology could penetrate Russia's most sophisticated defenses. The Moscow Stock Exchange temporarily suspended trading as investors fled Russian assets, triggering currency devaluation that would persist for weeks. Insurance claims from the drone attack revealed the true scope of economic damage. Property insurers faced hundreds of claims for broken windows, damaged vehicles, and structural repairs. Business interruption claims from companies forced to shut down during the attack added millions more in losses. The cumulative economic impact, including lost productivity, emergency response costs, and infrastructure repairs, exceeded $50 million within the first 48 hours. Electronic warfare capabilities played a crucial role in this Ukrainian victory. Advanced jamming systems disrupted Russian communication networks, creating blind spots in radar coverage that allowed drone penetration through previously impenetrable airspace. Real-time flight path adjustments exploited these electronic vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Ukrainian forces had studied Russian air defense frequencies for months, developing custom jamming profiles that could selectively blind specific radar installations while leaving others operational to avoid triggering backup. Protocols, the electronic warfare component, revealed Ukraine's sophisticated cyber capabilities. Rather than simply jamming all frequencies, Ukrainian operators employed precision electronic attacks that mimicked natural interference patterns. Russian radar operators initially attributed signal degradation to atmospheric conditions or equipment malfunction, delaying defensive responses during critical engagement windows. This level of electronic warfare sophistication typically requires years of intelligence gathering and technical development. GPS spoofing technology further complicated Russian defensive efforts. Ukrainian drones transmitted false positioning data that confused Russian tracking systems, making interception calculations impossible. When Russian interceptor missiles locked onto drone positions, they found empty airspace as their targets had already maneuvered to completely different locations. This technological cat-and-mouse game demonstrated Ukraine's rapid advancement in military technology despite resource constraints. The Kremlin's immediate response revealed the political desperation behind their military failures. State media launched an aggressive disinformation campaign, claiming minimal damage while simultaneously censoring social media footage showing burning buildings and emergency evacuations. Independent journalists faced immediate suppression as authorities prioritized narrative control over citizen safety. Government officials found themselves trapped between acknowledging the attack's severity to justify increased defense spending and downplaying the damage to maintain political credibility. Russian television broadcasts immediately shifted to patriotic programming, featuring documentary footage of Soviet-era military victories and interviews with military experts dismissing Ukrainian capabilities. However, the abundance of social media evidence made traditional propaganda techniques ineffective. Residents continued posting videos of damaged buildings and emergency vehicles, creating an alternative information ecosystem that bypassed state media control. The information warfare battle extended to international audiences as Russian diplomats attempted to frame the drone attack as terrorism rather than legitimate military action. However, international law clearly permits attacks on military infrastructure and command centers, making Russian complaints legally groundless. The propaganda effort backfired, as it drew additional attention to Russian air defense failures while highlighting Ukraine's growing military sophistication. International observers noted the strategic implications, extending far beyond Moscow's city limits. Ukraine demonstrated that smaller nations could effectively challenge military superpowers through technological innovation rather than traditional force multiplication. This drone strike methodology represents a paradigm shift in asymmetric warfare that will influence global military strategy for decades. NATO military planners immediately began studying Ukrainian tactics for potential incorporation into alliance doctrine. The strategic messaging embedded in the drone attack transcended immediate military objectives. Ukraine signaled to international allies that it possessed the capability and resolve to strike strategic Russian targets, making continued military aid investments worthwhile. Conversely, the attack demonstrated to potential adversaries worldwide that expensive defensive systems provide limited protection against innovative offensive tactics employing readily available commercial technology. The military academies across the globe began revising their curricula to incorporate drone swarm tactics and counter-swarm defensive measures. The Ukrainian drone strike became an immediate case study in asymmetric warfare, demonstrating how technological innovation could overcome numerical and resource disadvantages. Defense contractors worldwide began developing new anti-drone systems, recognizing that traditional air defense architectures had become obsolete overnight. Russian defense contractors now face impossible questions about their $1.2 billion air defense investments. How do you justify systems that cannot stop $50,000 commercial drones? The cost-effectiveness disparity makes continued conventional warfare economically unsustainable for Russia while providing Ukraine with scalable offensive capabilities. Rostec, Russia's primary defense conglomerate, faced immediate congressional inquiries about air defense system effectiveness and demands for performance improvements. The technological gap revealed by the drone attack extended beyond immediate military implications. Russian defense industries had focused on countering traditional aircraft and ballistic missiles, neglecting the emerging drone threat that Western militaries had been studying for years. This technological blindness reflected broader problems in Russian military-industrial complex planning and innovation capabilities. Defense export implications became immediately apparent as international customers questioned Russian air defense system reliability. Countries that had invested billions in S-400 systems began demanding performance guarantees and upgrade paths to counter drone threats. The reputation damage to Russian military exports, traditionally a major foreign currency earner, added another economic dimension to the drone attack's strategic impact. The ripple effects continue spreading through Russian society as citizens question government promises of absolute security. Parents keep children home from schools near potential targets, businesses relocate operations away from strategic infrastructure, and investor confidence plummets as Moscow's invulnerability myth crumbles. Real estate prices in central Moscow began declining as residents sought properties in suburban areas perceived as less likely targets for future attacks. Educational institutions near government buildings experienced enrollment declines as parents transferred children to schools in outer districts. Commercial property owners struggled to attract tenants for buildings near potential military targets, creating localized economic distress in previously prime real estate markets. The psychological geography of Moscow fundamentally shifted as residents internalized the reality that their city had become a legitimate military target. Medical professionals reported increased anxiety disorders and sleep disruption among Moscow residents. In the weeks following the drone attack, the distinctive sound of aircraft engines now triggered panic responses in many citizens who had never experienced combat conditions. Mental health services faced unprecedented demand as the psychological trauma of war finally reached Russia's protected elite populations. Consumer behavior patterns shifted dramatically as Moscow residents began stockpiling emergency supplies and developing evacuation plans. Sporting goods stores reported surges in camping equipment sales as families prepared for potential displacement. Pharmacies experienced runs on basic medical supplies, while grocery stores struggled to maintain inventory levels as panic buying episodes recurred whenever air raid sirens activated for routine drills. This Ukrainian drone offensive marks a turning point in the Russia-Ukraine conflict where technological superiority trumps numerical advantages. Modern warfare now belongs to nations capable of rapid innovation rather than those hoarding expensive legacy weapon systems. The floating fortress of Russian air defenses has been exposed as a paper tiger, vulnerable to swarms of intelligent machines guided by Ukrainian ingenuity. Regional power dynamics shifted as neighboring countries realized that Russian air defenses could not protect them from similar attacks. Eastern European nations accelerated their NATO integration processes, while Middle Eastern allies of Russia began diversifying their security relationships. The drone attack's strategic messaging resonated far beyond its immediate tactical objectives, reshaping international perceptions of military capabilities and alliance value. The world watched in awe as Ukraine's $50,000 drones neutralized Russia's billion-dollar defenses, forever changing how we understand military power in the digital age. This is the new reality of warfare, where innovation defeats intimidation, and small nations can humble superpowers through superior strategy and cutting-edge drone technology. The dawn of drone warfare has arrived, and traditional military hierarchies will never be the same again. Military. Historians are already comparing the Ukrainian drone strike to pivotal moments like the first use of tanks in World War I or stealth aircraft in the Gulf War, technological breakthroughs that fundamentally altered battlefield dynamics and strategic thinking. The full implications of this warfare revolution will unfold over decades as nations adapt their military doctrines, defense investments, and strategic partnerships to address the new reality where determination and innovation matter more than raw firepower and legacy systems. The Ukrainian drone attack on Moscow represents more than a tactical victory. It marks the beginning of a new era in warfare where the rules of engagement have been permanently rewritten by swarms of intelligent machines, guided by human ingenuity and an unbreakable will to resist.